On June 6, 1944, the largest seaborne invasion in history had to cross the Channel, clear lanes, hold the schedule, and put men on 5 beaches at once. The entire naval operation, Operation Neptune, was commanded by a British Admiral, Sir Bertram Ramsay. The popular D-Day story almost never says his name. It remembers the beaches. It remembers the American ground fight. It almost never remembers the man who ran the sea. That isn't a soft omission, not an understandable compression of a complex story. It's a specific, measurable gap between what Ramsay actually commanded and what popular memory credits him with. The two don't match. The distance between them is the argument. Start with the command structure itself, because that's where the gap becomes visible. Operation Neptune isn't the same thing as Operation Overlord, and that distinction is load-bearing. Operation Overlord was the codename for the entire Allied campaign to liberate northwest Europe. The ground war, the air war, the sea war, the months of battle that followed June 6th. Operation Neptune was the specific naval and amphibious assault phase, the crossing of the Channel, the landing on the beaches, the immediate maritime support, everything that required a fleet. The National World War II Museum states it plainly. Neptune was the naval assault phase, Overlord was the broader invasion strategy. The British Friends of Normandy go further, calling it a common misconception to use Overlord as the code word for the seaborne landings themselves. Ramsay commanded Neptune. His title was Allied Naval Commander Expeditionary Force, ANCXF. 2 task forces answered to that designation. The Western Naval Task Force, under American Rear Admiral Alan G. Kirk, was assigned to Omaha and Utah. The Eastern Naval Task Force, under British Rear Admiral Philip Vian, was assigned to Gold, Juno, and Sword. A Defense Technical Information Center study on the U.S. Navy in Operation Overlord is direct. Kirk assumed command of the Western Naval Task Force under British Admiral Bertram Ramsay's Allied Naval Expeditionary Force. Kirk's responsibilities included Omaha Beach, later expanded to Utah. Both task forces nested inside a single naval command architecture with a British admiral at the top. That's not a coordination role. It's the command spine of the whole crossing. To understand how the credit gap happened, start 4 years earlier with a much smaller rescue and a much more desperate sea. By late May 1940, Germany had driven through France in 18 days. The British Expeditionary Force, the professional corps of the British Army, roughly 400,000 men, found itself encircled, pressed against the coast near Dunkirk, with no route out except 30 miles of open Channel water. German armour held the land. The Luftwaffe owned the sky. The War Office's most optimistic assessment was that 45,000 men might be saved over 2 days before German forces tightened the pocket and the rest surrendered. After that, Britain would be fighting Germany with whatever scraped-together conscript army it could raise from scratch. The operation that would try to save them was called Operation Dynamo. The name came from the room where it was planned. Beneath Dover Castle, carved into chalk cliffs approximately 85 feet below ground, were tunnels that had first served a medieval garrison and had been expanded during the Napoleonic Wars. In 1914, one of those underground chambers was fitted with an electrical generator, a dynamo, to power the naval command during the First World War. That room was still there in 1940, unchanged. When the evacuation began, Ramsay commandeered it as his operations centre. His staff set up their charts and radios and cipher machines in the same damp stone space that smelled of chalk dust and old cable insulation. The codename Dynamo came directly from that room. from the machine that had once sat in the corner producing electricity.
Ramsay worked from that room for 9 straight days without meaningful rest.
The operation moved in shifts around him. Ships would cross to the beaches, load what men they could from the surf or the breakwater, return to Dover under Luftwaffe harassment, discharge their human cargo onto the docks, and turn back. Then again. Then again. Ramsay's function was to keep the cycle running, assigning vessels, rerouting around U-boats and E-boats, managing the desperate arithmetic of how many men were still on the beach against how many crossings were physically possible before the perimeter collapsed. The numbers changed every hour. German bombing had destroyed Dunkirk's harbour facilities, meaning troops had to wade into the water or queue along a wooden breakwater, the East Mole, that had never been designed as a boarding platform. It was 1,400 yards long, wide enough for men to walk 4 abreast, and it held for the entire evacuation. On June 2nd, with the last British troops nearly away, senior naval officer Captain William Tennant radioed Ramsay from Dunkirk that the BEF had been evacuated. The message meant that roughly 850 vessels had completed what the War Office had privately thought impossible. The final count, when Dynamo closed on June 4, 338,226 British and Allied soldiers brought home. Nearly 240 of the rescue vessels were lost to air attack, mines and shell fire. 6 of Ramsay's destroyers were sunk. 23 more were damaged. The margin between success and catastrophe had been thinner than the newspapers ever conveyed. He had been brought back from retirement to run it. In July 1938, after a career that appeared finished, a post as Chief of Staff to Admiral Roger Backhouse at the Home Fleet had collapsed in a conflict of personalities, with Ramsay requesting relief from a superior he reportedly compared in private to Mussolini. He had been placed on the retired list with the rank of Vice Admiral. His career appeared over. Then, war approached. Dover needed someone who knew its waters, who had commanded its patrols during the First World War, who understood the particular problems of moving men and ships through the Strait of Dover under pressure. Ramsay hoisted his Vice Admiral's flag at Dover on August 24, 1939. 10 days later, Britain declared war. For that achievement at Dunkirk, he was summoned to report to King George VI in person and awarded the Knight Commander of the Bath. Churchill called it a miracle. The newspapers called it the Dunkirk spirit. Most of the credit flowed toward the soldiers on the beaches and the civilian boat owners who crossed the channel in their fishing vessels and pleasure craft. The Admiral in the chalk dust room received somewhat less. That pattern would repeat. You probably already know the Dunkirk story. Christopher Nolan built a film around it in 2017 that grossed over $500 million worldwide and introduced a new generation to the evacuation. What the Nolan film didn't do, and the gap here is worth marking, is center Ramsay as a character. The command perspective, the planning rooms, the Admiral who kept the fleet running. None of it made the cut. The event he commanded became a major cultural monument. The man who commanded it didn't appear in it. This isn't a grievance about the film. It's simply the same structural dynamic that would later apply to Neptune. When the story is told from the beaches, from the surf, from inside the machinery, the architect disappears. After Dunkirk, Ramsay commanded the waters off Dover for nearly 2 more years against a German-occupied French coastline. He moved to the naval side of the North Africa landings in 1942, Operation Torch. He planned the amphibious assault on Sicily in 1943, Operation Husky. Each operation was larger than the last, each one adding to a body of amphibious expertise that had no parallel in the Allied command structure. Alan Packwood, director of the Churchill Archives Centre at Cambridge, put it precisely. Ramsay was the go-to man for complex naval operations, although nothing he had done was anything like as complex as D-Day itself. By 1943, Eisenhower considered Ramsay an exceptionally able commander, and no British officer was working more effectively with the American command structure. When the time came to appoint the naval commander for the invasion of France, the choice wasn't in doubt. The Neptune plan that Ramsay issued from Southwark House, the requisitioned country house near Portsmouth that the Royal Navy had designated HMS Dryad, in late February 1944, was described by those who received it as several inches thick. That isn't metaphor. It specified the coordinated movement of nearly 7,000 vessels total, including 5 battleships, 23 cruisers, and scores of destroyers and destroyer escorts, across all 5 beaches. Before a single vessel could cross, 10 separate lanes through German minefields had to be swept from England to the Norman coast, a task requiring more than 250 minesweepers working in darkness with the invasion timetable already running. The minesweepers went first. They crossed the channel in the early hours of June 5th, finding their lanes by dead reckoning, laying lighted buoys to mark the swept channels, working in conditions that their logs would later describe as rough. 2-metre swells, a northwesterly wind at 15 knots, the kind of sea that makes even large warships roll. Behind them came the assault fleet, thousands of vessels that had been staged from ports across southern England, held in the vast, congested rendezvous area the planners had named Piccadilly Circus. To picture the administrative scale of what Ramsay had to synchronise, each of 5 beaches needed its own bombardment force, its own sequence of landing craft waves, its own tidal timing. Because the beaches faced slightly different directions and the tide ran differently across a 45-mile front. Gold Beach's schedule wasn't Sword Beach's schedule. The wave sequencing for each beach had to account for the height of the underwater obstacles, the rate at which the tide was rising, the specific guns defending each sector, and the precise moment when the supporting bombardment would shift from the beach to the inland positions. Any of those timing relationships going wrong would send infantry into uncleared obstacles in a rising tide against unsilenced guns. Ramsay was formally reinstated to the active list on April 26, 1944, and promoted to full Admiral the following day, which means that for the better part of the planning period, the man designing the most complex naval operation in history had technically been on the retired list while doing it. His status was normalised in the paperwork only weeks before the invasion itself. The naval plan was frozen on May 12th. On May 26th, Ramsay issued the signal that set the Armada moving. Carry out Operation Neptune. Armed guards sealed crews aboard their ships. From that point, there was no returning to port without specific authorization. The fleet was committed. On June 1st, the official command transfer happened. According to the US Naval History and Heritage Command's own narrative record. At 1200, 1st June 1944, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay assumed operational command of Neptune forces and general control of operations in the Channel. 5 days before the landings, general control of operations in the Channel. Then the weather deteriorated. The forecast for June 5th, Eisenhower's original date, was too dangerous to risk. Conditions at sea would sink the smaller landing craft. The bombardment ships couldn't hold station in those swells. Eisenhower postponed by 24 hours, a decision that meant holding the entire fleet in position, maintaining the deception, keeping thousands of men sealed aboard ships in heavy weather, waiting. During those days, Ramsay wrote to his wife Margaret. The letter wasn't the controlled prose of an officer composing for posterity. It was the writing of a man carrying weight. He described the preceding days as particularly anxious and trying, the weather having turned sour, difficult decisions made, and considerable risks accepted. He wrote that he could only pray they would prove justified, for the lives of hundreds of thousands were at stake. Hundreds of thousands. Not the language of a man with a limited brief. June 6, 1944. The plan executed across all 5 beaches. The Eisenhower Presidential Library records 7,000 ships and landing craft manned by over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 Allied countries. The Imperial War Museum is unambiguous. On 6 June 1944, 2 naval task forces landed over 132,000 ground troops on the beaches of Normandy as part of Operation Neptune. 2 task forces, both under Ramsay, all 5 beaches. The troop numbers make the scope concrete. Roughly 75,000 British and Canadian troops landed by sea on D-Day. Approximately 25,000 at Gold, 21,400 at Juno, and 29,000 at Sword. On the American side, roughly 57,000 came ashore by sea, about 34,000 at Omaha and 23,000 at Utah. These are seaborne figures only, drawn from the U.S. European Command's official D-Day fact sheet, separate from the 23,400 Allied airborne troops who arrived by parachute and glider in the hours before dawn. U.S. Army historian Gordon A. Harrison noted that no exact figures are possible for any individual beach, but the official compilations put the British-Canadian seaborne total higher than the American one. More British and Canadian troops crossed by sea on June 6th than American ones. The naval command over the entire lift was British. The popular story primarily remembers the American beaches. Those 3 facts together describe the gap precisely, not as grievance, but as geometry. Neptune's scale didn't stop on June 6th. By June 30th, the operation had delivered approximately 862,000 men, 158,000 vehicles, and 502,000 tons of supplies onto the Normandy shore. The historian Corelli Barnett described Ramsay's achievement in coordinating nearly 7,000 vessels and more than 160,000 men onto the beaches on D-Day alone as a never-surpassed masterpiece of planning. The author of Sand and Steel, a major D-Day history published in 2019, is direct. Without the massive maritime sustainment of Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay's Operation Neptune, the Allied coalition wouldn't have broken out into France. The sea machine wasn't a supporting act, it was the invasion. And to put one final specific proof on the table, Neptune wasn't a 2-lane operation. British command for British beaches on one side and American command for American beaches on the other. The command architecture was unified, total, and British at the top. The strongest evidence of that comes from the most American beach of all. At Omaha, the beach Spielberg filmed, the beach the world pictures, the beach where American casualties ran highest on June 6th, the command skin above the assault was British. Kirk's entire Western Naval Task Force operated within Ramsay's ANCXF structure from the moment it formed. The command architecture over Omaha was British, the men going ashore were American. Both things are true simultaneously. The popular story tells you only one of them. In 1998, Steven Spielberg released Saving Private Ryan. It grossed approximately $480 million worldwide and won 5 Academy Awards: Best Director, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Sound, and Best Sound Effects Editing. Its opening sequence, depicting the American assault on Omaha Beach, permanently altered how the world pictures June 6, 1944.
BBC culture, marking the invasion's 80th anniversary, was unequivocal. No film has shaped the popular imagination of D-Day as thoroughly as Steven Spielberg's 1998 masterpiece. What that opening sequence actually shows, in technical terms, is a landing craft ramp dropping, soldiers immediately cut down by German machine gun fire before they can step forward, and a platoon of American Rangers attempting to cross an open kill zone and scale chalk bluffs under fire from prepared positions. The sequence was shot with deliberately unsteady, desaturated cinematography. Spielberg stripped out John Williams's score entirely for the battle. No musical accompaniment, only gunfire and the sound of men dying. Hopefully, if we've played our cards right, Spielberg said during production, the audience will think that we were there. He succeeded completely. James Chapman, professor of film studies at the University of Leicester, described the sequence in the BBC's anniversary coverage as existing in the pantheon of great movie action sequences, alongside Eisenstein's Odessa Steps. John C. McManus, professor of U.S. military history at Missouri S&T and author of The Dead and Those About to Die, A History of the 1st Infantry Division at Omaha, gave the BBC his assessment. The movie is so powerful and so skillfully made that it has stayed with us perpetually as a kind of visual and emotional base point for what we imagine Omaha Beach and Normandy must have been like. The runtime of that sequence is cited differently by different sources. Some estimate 22 minutes, others say 27 or 28. The most commonly cited figure is somewhere around 24 minutes. The precision doesn't alter the effect. Whatever its exact length, those minutes didn't just depict the invasion, they defined it. Every anniversary broadcast, every school history lesson, every documentary opening sequence since 1998 has competed with Spielberg's Omaha for the cognitive space where D-Day lives in global consciousness. The beach. Ramsay's entire naval machine put men on became, through the specific alchemy of that film, the beach that tells the whole story. Spielberg made a deliberate artistic choice to put the camera at ground level, inside a landing craft, on a single beach, following a single unit. It's a ruthlessly effective choice. The deliberate prevention of wider context, the absence of aerial shots, the refusal to show the broader fleet, the removal of any scenes set in a command room, is what makes the sequence feel like lived experience rather than historical reconstruction. But the cost of that immersion is that the world around that landing craft effectively ceases to exist. The fleet that crossed the channel, the minesweepers that cleared 10 lanes through German mines, the bombardment ships that fired tens of thousands of rounds before H-hour, the Admiral who issued the order that set all of it moving 5 days before the landings. None of that exists within the frame Spielberg built, and that frame is now the frame. It's what D-Day looks like. Chapman told the BBC directly, "Saving Private Ryan manages to give the impression that D-Day was an entirely American affair." He continued, "British historians were at pains to point out that more British and Commonwealth troops were in the field on 6th of June than Americans. That historical correction has been made, repeatedly, by academics and military historians. It hasn't moved the needle on popular perception, because perception isn't shaped by academic correction. It's shaped by the film you saw when you were 16. Ramsay isn't named in Saving Private Ryan. No character equivalent to him appears anywhere in the film. No scene is set in an Allied naval headquarters or on the bridge of a command vessel. The only mention of Britain's role in the whole operation is a passing disparaging line from Tom Hanks's Captain Miller about the overrated
General Montgomery.
The fleet that put those rangers on the beach, that cleared the obstacles, that provided the fire support from offshore destroyers. In the film's world, it's weather. Something that happened to you before the real story started on the sand. Spielberg's cultural footprint extended beyond the film itself. He produced Band of Brothers, the 2001 HBO series that followed an American airborne company from training through the end of the war, building its own visual grammar from the same Omaha to victory axis. The 1999 Medal of Honor video game, which Spielberg worked on directly, recreated the Omaha landing for millions of players worldwide. An entire generation formed its D-Day instincts inside a cultural frame that Spielberg built over several years. And that frame is American, coastal, infantry level, and Omaha-centric. There is a counterpoint, and it deserves honest acknowledgement. The Longest Day, the 1962 Darrell F. Zanuck production based on Cornelius Ryan's 1959 non-fiction account, does include Ramsay. Actor John Robinson plays him in the credits as Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, Commander-in-Chief, Allied Naval Forces. The title is correct. The name is there. The film also includes substantial British and German sequences. Richard Burton as an RAF officer, Kenneth Moore as a Royal Navy beachmaster, Sean Connery in a British role, Trevor Reed as Montgomery. Zanuck tried to make a genuinely multinational picture, but The Longest Day is remembered through John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and Henry Fonda. Wayne as Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, limping on a broken ankle and refusing to leave his men. Mitchum on the bluffs as Brigadier General Norman Cotter. Fonda as Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the oldest man on the beaches, waving his troops forward with a walking stick. These are the images the film left in popular consciousness. Zanuck had reportedly wanted Eisenhower himself to play the Supreme Commander, as if the American ground commander was the natural gravitational center of the story, the figure whose presence would most legitimize the whole enterprise. Ramsay's inclusion in The Longest Day didn't make him famous. His role is brief, not dramatically central, and not what audiences took away from the cinema. He was in the frame. He still didn't stick. That is, if anything, a more damning fact than pure absence. Present in the historical record, present in the cultural artifact, and still not remembered. The 1962 film named him, and 60 years later the question remains. Does the average person who's seen The Longest Day know who commanded the naval side of D-Day? The answer, documented by the very scholars who study D-Day memory, is almost certainly no. Craig Simmons, whose book Neptune, The Allied Invasion of Europe and the D-Day Landings, won the 2015 Samuel Eliot Morrison Award from the Naval Order of the United States, the premier American Naval History Prize, felt the need to begin his account by confronting the Spielberg image. He acknowledged that Operation Neptune, as a concept, conjures in most minds that Omaha sequence. The Naval Order of the United States described Neptune in its own award citation as the often overlooked naval arm of the D-Day invasion. When the institution that exists specifically to honor naval history describes naval history as overlooked, the scope of the problem isn't asserted, it's documented. The erasure is structural rather than intentional. That distinction matters, and it's the intellectually honest framing. When D-Day is narrated from inside a landing craft, from the infantry perspective, from the beach, from ground level, the Admiral is physically over the horizon. Not metaphorically over the horizon, literally. He is at Southwick House,
working a communications board, reading position reports, making adjustments to a plan already in motion. He isn't in anyone's field of view on the beach. He couldn't be.
Naval command at this scale operates at a systemic remove from the action it enables. The Admiral's function is to design the system that gets men to the beach. Once the ramps go down, that function is complete, and his presence in the forward narrative drops to near zero. This isn't a failure of Ramsay's command. It's what amphibious command looks like at scale. Ground commanders walk among their troops, appear in photographs alongside soldiers in foxholes, deliver speeches that veterans remember and quote in memoirs. Naval commanders plan at headquarters tables, dispatch forces forward, and wait for radio reports from the water. Their authority is total. Their visibility, to the men they deliver, is minimal by the nature of the job. The soldiers at Sword Beach didn't know Ramsay's name. They didn't need to. He had done his job the moment they stepped off the landing craft and found cleared obstacles and a beach where naval gunfire had done enough damage to the German defences to allow them to advance. The invisibility that kept men alive is the same invisibility that kept Ramsay's name out of the popular story. American cultural institutions compound this through ordinary mechanisms. The country that tells the most stories tells them from where it stood. The United States stood on two beaches. Its cultural machine, Hollywood most powerfully, but also television, publishing, gaming, and anniversary journalism, made those two beaches synonymous with the whole invasion over roughly 6 decades of accumulated retelling. The D-Day films were financed with American money, cast with American stars, and aimed at American audiences. This isn't conspiracy or malice, it's how cultural memory works. The stories that get told reflect the interests, resources, and perspectives of those telling them. But the cumulative output is a version of June 6 that by structure and repetition buries the British Naval Command spine under the American beach frame. Academic work has documented the gap directly. A Temple University dissertation traced the development of what it called an American D-Day tale, how the US telling of the story gradually crowded out other national perspectives and other command layers. The University of Cambridge's own research news describes Ramsay as D-Day's forgotten man, a phrase that appears not in a specialist military history journal, but on Cambridge's public-facing research platform. Brian Izzard, whose biography of Ramsay was published by Casemate under the title Mastermind of Dunkirk and D-Day, opened with the assessment: Sir Bertram Ramsay must be the least known of the great military figures of World War II. These aren't British grievances dressed as scholarship. They are scholars, British and American, describing a measurable condition in the historical record. Eisenhower has a presidential library in Abilene, Kansas. His face appears on multiple postage stamps. Montgomery is a figure of British national mythology, his beret and desert campaigns recognized in any English secondary school. Patton has a major Hollywood film with George C. Scott's face, released in 1970, still regularly screened. Ramsay has a statue at Dover Castle, erected in November 2000, 55 years after the war ended, and a personal archive at Churchill College, Cambridge, available to researchers who know to look for it. The contrast isn't in the quality of contribution, it's in who was present to collect credit when the war ended and the story was being written. On January 2, 1945, Ramsay left his headquarters near Versailles in the early morning for a flight to Brussels. He was travelling to meet Field Marshal Montgomery for a conference. His aircraft crashed on takeoff at Toussaint-le-Noble Airport, southwest of Paris. He was 61 years old. He was killed instantly. VE Day was May 8, 1945. Ramsay was already 4 months dead. He never wrote a memoir. He never gave the post-war interviews that shaped Eisenhower's and Montgomery's lasting reputations. He never sat across from a journalist in 1946 or 1952 describing what it had felt like to run Neptune from Southwark House. He never appeared on the BBC to tell his own story. He left behind his D-Day diary, operational orders, planning maps, wartime correspondence, and eyewitness accounts of Dunkirk. All of it now held at the Churchill Archive Centre in Cambridge, available by appointment in a climate-controlled reading room. A diary in an archive isn't the same as a published voice. Eisenhower wrote Crusade in Europe in 1948. Montgomery published his memoirs in 1958. Both books shaped how the command story was told for generations. Ramsay left documents in a filing room and a crash site in a French field. His wife, Margaret, received nearly 400 letters of condolence, 30 telegrams, and numerous other messages after the crash. Field Marshal Montgomery's tribute was recorded at the time. They weren't to live to see the fruits of their labours. But when this business is all over, and the world is once more at peace, we must not forget the part that was played by Bertie Ramsay and Lee Mallory, a great sailor and a great airman. Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory, the air commander for Neptune, had been killed in a separate crash in November 1944. Montgomery said not to forget. The world largely forgot. The ANCXF command structure Ramsay had built continued operating under a different officer through the rest of the war. When VE Day arrived and history began to write its first drafts, Ramsay wasn't present to correct the record, clarify his authority, or sit with the historians and broadcasters who were constructing the public narrative. The memoirists, the lecture circuit, the BBC talks, all of it reached those who had survived to be reached. Ramsay had not survived. There is a document at the D-Day Story Museum in Portsmouth, a printed message that Ramsay had distributed to the naval personnel under his command on June 3, 1944, 3 days before the landings. The museum holds it as an artifact. It includes these words: "This is the opportunity which we have long awaited and which must be seized and pursued with relentless determination." That message is now behind glass. His words are a museum exhibit. His name isn't in the anniversary broadcasts. Here is the clean summary of what the record shows. Bertram Ramsay commanded Operation Dynamo at Dunkirk. Recalled from retirement, working from a chalk tunnel room 85 feet below Dover Castle, he coordinated the evacuation of 338,226 soldiers in 9 days against an initial estimate of 45,000. He then commanded the naval side of North Africa, then Sicily. Each operation building the specific expertise that Neptune required. The technical knowledge of minesweeping corridors, bombardment sequencing, landing craft wave timing, beach obstacle clearance, logistics across open water under hostile air. By the time June 1944 arrived, he was, as Cambridge's archivists put it, the go-to man for complex naval operations. As Allied Naval Commander Expeditionary Force for Operation Neptune, he commanded the entire naval phase of D-Day across all 5 beaches. Western Task Force and Eastern Task Force both nested under his authority. Nearly 7,000 vessels, 195,000 naval personnel, a fleet that delivered over 132,000 troops by sea on June 6 alone, and approximately 862,000 by the end of June. His biographer calls him the least known great military figure of the Second World War. The University of Cambridge calls him D-Day's forgotten man. He died on January 2, 1945, 4 months before victory. He never wrote the book that would have told his own story.
Two defining sea lifts. Two of the war's most consequential naval operations. Almost no popular name recognition. The beaches exist because the naval operation put men there. That naval operation had a British commander.
His command ran from the moment the minesweepers entered the first swept lane through German minefields to the moment the last landing craft returned to England. He issued the order that started it. Carry out Operation Neptune. He assumed operational command on June 1st. He held it on June 6th. The seaborne troops who landed on all 5 beaches, American, British, Canadian, crossed inside the naval architecture he designed, coordinated, and on the day, commanded. The sand is famous. The Admiral who ran the sea isn't. His name is Sir Bertram Ramsay. Name him. If you want more stories like this, history that shifts your frame rather than confirms it, subscribe.